Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight's story is one that many believed would take years to unfold, if it ever happened at all. For months, Russia projected strength, control, and inevitability. State television promised victory. Officials claimed stability. The Kremlin insisted the front line was secure, but now something far more dangerous than enemy fire has emerged. Putin's front line is collapsing not because of one single Ukrainian strike, but because Russia's own army is breaking from within. What we are witnessing is not just a tactical setback or a temporary retreat. This is a systemic failure, a slow-motion implosion driven by exhaustion, corruption, fear, and the quiet realization among Russian soldiers that they are fighting a war with no clear purpose, no clear end, and no guarantee they will survive it. At first, the cracks were easy to ignore. Small units pulling back for regrouping. Commanders replaced quietly. Entire battalions rotated off the line earlier than expected. Russian officials called it routine. Military bloggers tried to explain it away as strategy. But soldiers on the ground knew the truth long before the world did. The front line wasn't bending, it was rotting from the inside. Reports began surfacing of entire platoons refusing to advance, not loudly, not dramatically, but silently. Orders were delayed, radios went unanswered, vehicles failed to move when told. Some units simply stayed in their trenches, refusing to step into what they knew was a death zone. Others abandoned positions overnight, leaving behind weapons, ammunition, and sometimes even wounded comrades. This wasn't panic in the traditional sense. It was resignation. Morale inside Russia's army has reached a critical low. Many soldiers have now spent months, even years, rotating through the same hellish conditions. They face constant drone surveillance, precision artillery strikes, and an enemy that adapts faster than their own commanders. Supplies arrive late or not at all. Food is scarce. Medical evacuation is unreliable. Winter brings freezing cold. Summer brings suffocating heat. And at every moment, death hangs overhead in the buzzing sound of a drone. What makes this collapse especially dangerous for the Kremlin is that it cannot be fixed with propaganda alone. Soldiers at the front no longer believe what they're told. They have seen reinforcements promised and never arrive. They've heard claims of victory while retreating under fire. They've been ordered to hold positions that make no tactical sense, simply because abandoning them would look bad on a map shown in Moscow. Inside the ranks, anger is growing not toward Ukraine, but toward their own leadership. Junior officers complain that senior commanders are more concerned with reporting success than ensuring survival. Decisions are made far from the battlefield by people who will never hear incoming shells. When positions collapse, blame flows downward. Soldiers pay the price. Perhaps the most alarming sign of internal breakdown is the rise in insubordination and desertion. Not mass defections in dramatic columns, but a steady, grinding leakage of manpower. Soldiers disappear during rotations. Some injure themselves deliberately to be evacuated. Others surrender at the first opportunity, choosing captivity over certain death. Every missing soldier weakens the line, and every weakened section invites collapse. Russia's army was built on the assumption that fear could substitute for motivation. Fear of punishment, fear of commanders, fear of prison, fear of shame, but fear only works for so long. Eventually, exhaustion overtakes it. And when soldiers realize that disobedience may be less deadly than obedience, the entire system begins to fail. Equipment shortages have amplified the crisis. Tanks sent to the front lack proper maintenance. Artillery barrels are worn out. Air defense systems are stretched thin. Soldiers complain that they are sent into battle with outdated gear while being hunted by modern precision weapons. This technological gap has psychological consequences. When you feel outmatched before the fight even begins, hope dies quickly. Communication failures have also become a major factor in the collapse. Units lose contact with headquarters for hours or even days. Orders contradict one another. Intelligence arrives too late to matter. In some cases, Russian units have unknowingly advanced into kill zones already mapped by Ukrainian forces, simply because no one warned them in time. Each disaster chips away at confidence. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have learned how to exploit this internal weakness. Rather than launching massive frontal assaults, they apply pressure selectively. A strike here, a breakthrough there, just enough to force Russian commanders to redeploy exhausted units again and again. Each redeployment spreads the front line thinner, increasing stress and reducing cohesion. Eventually, something snaps, and when one section of the line collapses, the effect spreads rapidly. Neighboring units panic, fearing encirclement. Supply routes are cut. Artillery support disappears. What was once a controlled retreat becomes a chaotic withdrawal. Vehicles clog roads. Commanders lose control. In modern warfare, collapse is contagious. Inside Russia, the reality of this breakdown is becoming harder to hide. Families notice when letters stop coming, when bodies return in sealed coffins, when promised payments are delayed or denied. Social media fills with quiet questions and angry posts, even as censorship tightens. The narrative of strength no longer matches the lived experience of loss. The Kremlin faces a brutal dilemma. Acknowledging the collapse risks undermining its authority. Denying it risks making the situation worse. Sending fresh troops may temporarily stabilize the line, but those troops will inherit the same problems: poor leadership, inadequate support, and a war that feels endless. Mobilization only feeds the cycle of resentment. There is also the question of trust between soldiers and commanders, trust between officers and politicians, trust between the state and its people. That trust is eroding rapidly. Once lost, it is almost impossible to rebuild in the middle of a war. What makes this moment especially significant is timing. Russia is not facing collapse at the beginning of the conflict, when mistakes are expected. It is facing collapse after years of fighting, after claiming adaptation and reform, after insisting it had learned from early failures. That suggests the problems are not temporary, they are structural. History shows us that armies rarely lose wars solely because of enemy strength. They lose when internal cohesion breaks down, when soldiers no longer believe in victory, when leaders stop listening to reality and start believing their own lies, when survival becomes more important than success. We are seeing all of these elements converge now on Russia's front line. The war has entered a phase where psychological endurance matters as much as firepower. And on that front, Russia is losing ground fast. Every collapsed trench, every abandoned position, sends a message down the line. You are on your own. That message spreads fear faster than any artillery barrage. It tells soldiers that the system will not save them, that their lives are expendable. That retreat may be the only rational choice. Putin's greatest fear was never NATO weapons or Ukrainian drones. It was the possibility that his own army would stop believing, that the machine he built on obedience and control would grind to a halt when individuals decided they had nothing left to give. That moment appears to be arriving. This does not mean the war ends tomorrow. A collapsing front line does not equal instant defeat. Russia still has manpower, weapons, and the ability to cause immense destruction. But the direction is clear. An army breaking from within cannot sustain long-term offensive operations. It can only react, retreat, and hope to survive. As pressure continues, the choices facing Moscow will grow darker. Escalation carries enormous risks. De-escalation carries political costs. Doing nothing guarantees further collapse. None of these options offer a clean escape. For the soldiers still trapped on the line, the reality is even harsher. They wake up each day knowing they are part of a force that no longer functions as promised. They fight not for victory, but for survival, and that is the most dangerous stage of any war. Because when an army stops fighting for a cause and starts fighting only to stay alive, discipline crumbles. Orders lose meaning. Unity dissolves. The front line doesn't just collapse, it dissolves into chaos. What we are witnessing now may be remembered as the turning point where Russia's war effort crossed from strain into irreversible decline. Not because of one decisive battle, but because of countless small failures that added up to something far greater. The collapse is not loud, it is not announced, it happens quietly, trench by trench, soldier by soldier. And by the time it becomes visible to everyone, it is already too late to stop. This is not just a military crisis. It is a political, social, and psychological reckoning, and its consequences will reach far beyond the battlefield. So, as the fighting continues and headlines shift, remember this. The most powerful weapon in any war is belief. Belief in leadership, belief in purpose, belief in tomorrow. On Russia's front line, that belief is fading fast. And once it's gone, no amount of force can bring it back.